Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to class's September webinar. Today, we're very excited to be showing off new functionality around SuperStream for rollover and digital release authorities. Now, we will also be rolling out this functionality later today in class. My name is Sebastian Brennan. I'm one of the consulting team leaders at class, and I'm joined today by a very experienced Kevin Zhang, who's our technical compliance manager. G'day, Kevin.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So a quick disclaimer before we begin, the information that we're covering today is general in nature, and whilst we've made every effort to ensure the accuracy of the information, no warranty is provided and it is subject to change. So whilst we wait for a few more people to trickle in, let's begin with our first poll question of the day. So I'll just share that with you guys. So what we want to know is, on average, how many rollovers and release authority does your practice process per year? So we'll give you a couple of moments to complete that. And I will then share our results. So a few more seconds and I'll end that poll now. All right, so it looks like it's pretty even between the first two, less than 10 or 10 to 50, the most common. There's a couple of practices that are in the 51 to 100 and 100 plus. All right, so today we're going to be, as I mentioned, covering off SuperStream for rollover and release authorities. So we're going to start out with Kevin taking us through the overview of SuperStream, including the background, what the intended benefits are of this new functionality, and some new terminology that you need to be across. I'll then take you through a checklist of prerequisites that you need to be completing before you can make use of the functionality that we've rolled out in class. And then I'll take you through a demo of our new functionality. So we'll take you through what's available today, which we'll be releasing later today, and what we will be phasing out as part of a later release. We will conclude the webinar today by taking you through our benchmark report that we released today. So we'll take you through a few snapshots to provide you with some insight around average balances for males versus females over the last couple of years, what's been happening with catch-up contributions, and also some insights around the downsizer contributions. So some fascinating stats there, and KZ, Kevin will take you through that in a moment. So today we have, once again, the option for you to answer questions throughout the webinar. We have both Zahir and Bayan who will be here to help answer questions. Time permitting, we'll take a few questions at the end of the webinar to answer. And as always, we will endeavour to send out a copy of the webinar, the recording and the presentation next week. So Kevin, over to you to take us through the SuperStream overview.
Hi, everyone. I would like to start the session by going through the legislative framework around SuperStream. As you can see, the government did have a couple of false starts. The original intention to include SuperStream for settlement of super fund rollovers was intended for 30th November 2019 start date. Obviously, that did not eventuate. There's a couple of reasons why it did not eventuate. Part of it is because generally, in order to support rollover out for APRA funds to settlement of super funds, and most APRA funds are not really interested because they are effectively supporting the funds leaving their control. So it got delayed. Obviously, COVID-19 didn't help on that front either. So the new bill, the Treasury Law Amendment deferring extension of SuperStream for settlement of super funds regulation 2019 had the mandated start date of 31st March 2021. But even with that, the ATO stepping provide a transitional period for extra 6 months using their administrative power. So The transitional period basically from 1st April 2021, they are onboarding gradually different providers that's going to support SuperStream messages. So Class is actually the first one in the industry to actually have the functionality ready, hopefully by end of today. But we're still waiting for the rest of the industry to join on board, particularly the APRA funds and other self-managed super fund providers. But the absolutely compliance date is actually 1st October 2021. I would also like to take this opportunity to go back in history to go through a little bit background on SuperStream measures. So SuperStream, most people should be already familiar with SuperStreams. The actual legislation and the data payment standards was developed back in 2012 and 13. And this is on the back of strong super reforms. Now, the first measure they actually introduced SuperStream standards is for the rollover between APRA funds. And that was done initially from 2013. And it took about 2 to 3 years for them to fully transition the rest of the APRA funds across. Now, in 2015-17, they extended the SuperStream measures to support contributions. Initially, they started to support that for large and medium employers, and gradually they want a small, medium business to mandate a SuperStream for contributions as well, including self-managed super funds. So if you have been using Class, most of the employee contributions should be using the SuperStream measures and coming through as data feeds automatically in Class. Finally, which is the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, is that they want to extend the SuperStream for rollover of self-managed super funds. Now, you may ask, what's the fuss about, supporting SuperStream measures for rollovers? Now, here are a couple of key benefits. So what I did was I actually researched the APRA funds, how they implement the SuperStream for rollovers and what other benefits they have derived. So this is from this report called SuperStream Program Benefit Reports, produced by the ATO in conjunction with APRA. So they have identified it's a very costly exercise. Previously, used to cost around $75 per rollover hour. In 2013, it was reduced slightly to 65. But in 2016, when all the APRA funds adopting the standards, they saw massive reduction in the fees, almost 90% reduction in fees. So this, on average, saving over $100 million of cost associated with rollover transactions. But what interests us the most is on the right-hand side graph. So this is the number of days originally required to process rollover between APRA funds. Initially, back in 2010, the mandate day was 28 days, but in reality, in actual practice, most APRA funds take up to 65 days to processing rollovers. But since the adoption of SuperStream measures, that number has reduced to 3 business days. We want to replicate that success in the self-managed super fund industry as well. So there's one more benefit I have not provided in the graphs. So this is about improving the accuracy and reduce the data and payment errors once all the self-managed are moving to support that via SuperStream. Now, with any new measures, there are new terminologies and concepts that you need to understand. The first one most people should be very familiar with. This is the electronic service address, ESA. So if you've been using Class for a period of time, Class default ESA will be SMSF data flow. So it is just an alias used by self-managed super fund as the digital mailbox to receive and process SuperStream messages for contribution paid by employers, rollovers between the funds. Now, finally, it also includes digital release authorities issued by the ATO. Additional 2 concepts called transferring fund and receiving fund. It's very obvious. So the transferring fund is the super fund that originally holds the member interest. Now they are paying the amount from that interest to another super fund. The receive fund is the other counterparty. So that's the super fund received the payment from the transferring fund and allocated amount to members' interest in that fund. Additional two concepts called initial rollover request, or the acronym is IRR. That's the SuperStream messages sent from the receiving fund to the transferring fund to trigger a rollover request from the transferring fund to the receiving fund. The rollover transaction request, or RTR, it's the SuperStream messages sent from the transferring fund to the receiving fund, advise the details related to the rollover information. Finally, there's a term called electronic portability form, or EPF in short. So this is the electronic facility provided by the ITO to make it easier and simpler for members to consolidate their super accounts. So just bear in mind, ETF is in relation to, because EPF is in relation to consolidate super accounts. Unlike initial rollover requests, it's always done as a full rollover out of the balance. And given EPF is triggered by the ATO, therefore ATO will validate member and fund details before sending that message to the receiving fund. Okay, so what's included in the SuperStream measures? So obviously, you must use the SuperStream data and payment standards when your member requests a rollover of their member benefits to another super fund. This includes where you're required to roll over your members' benefits, including partial rollover between the upper funds, retirement saving accounts, and finally, they are including self-managed super funds. There are a couple of known exceptions to these SuperStream measures. They are, if you are doing rolling to and from a non-compliant super fund, that's not supported. Closed products normally refers to the situation where a financial institution taking over another financial institution, including some of their products, and they're phasing out those products. The calculation of the preservation components and asset drawdown in relation to partial rollover are not included in the message, partially because those information will be calculated before triggering a rollover request. Rollover amendment and cancellation are not part of the SuperStream measures. If the rollover include any in specie amount, that's deliberately excluded as well. Internal transfer, fund transfer rollovers are not included. For most of the self-managed super fund situation, the example I can think of is like contribution split, where it's actually a split between the husband and wife as an internal transfer. Finally, family law settlement is deliberately excluded as well. Now, SuperStream Rollover Standard version 3 also support release authorities. So if you are using class ESA, which now supports SuperStream and rollover measures, then ATO will send you release authority forms electronically going forward when we turn on the feature. Now, if the fund currently does not using a ESA, or the ESA does not support SuperStream rollover release authorities, then the fund will continually receive release authorities by paper form. So what are the release authority currently supported under this measure? So ATO has identified 6 commonly used release authority processing. The first one is the first home saving account, excess concessional contribution, excess non-concessional contribution, excess non-concessional contribution tax, Div 293 tax, and Div 293 deferred payments. The acronyms in the bracket, it's actually is the event code when you see those messages. So if, for example, if you see the acronym ECC, that relates to excess concessional contribution release authorities. Now, in order to support this, ATO has provided 2 additional services specific for self-managed super funds. The first one off the rank is called self-managed super fund verification services, or in acronym SVS. So this is the service where if a super fund want to initiate a rollover out to a self-managed super fund, they must validate the self-managed super fund details against their services. The trustee of the self-managed super fund can access that service, or trustee can authorize their nominated intermediary. So in class example, that will be your tax agents, can access that service on their behalf. So what does this service actually validate? So you validate a number of key informations. The first one is the self-managed super fund status, whether it's compliant super fund or regulated super fund. The TFM of the individuals associated with the self-managed super fund, whether ATO has a record of date of death against a member in which you want to trigger a rollover process. Obviously, the self-managed super fund bank account details held by the ATO. And finally, the electronic service address, ESA, held by the ATO. Now, because of the privacy and security reasons, if you do get errors when you access their services, ATO will not specify exactly what the errors is in relation to. They are only returning two types of messages. One is valid, which means everything agrees with ATO records, then you can initiate a rollover request. And the other one is basically not valid. With not valid information or not unverified response, it's a split into two types. So one is the SMSF not valid, or member, or MEM not valid. Now, they are not going to tell you exactly what are the cause of these invalid reasons, but it's up to the trustee and members to contact ATO, whether update their details, fix that information before they can trigger another rollover process. Similarly, another service they have provided is called the SMSF member tick services. So this is the service where, again, it's in relation to rollover into a self-managed super fund, verify the members' details against their TFM and other key identity informations. This part is very, very similar to the other services. If you do get an error message, you ought to get a valid or non-valid response. The non-valid response can be a number of reasons why ATO will return such message. The original member who supplied the information to you to verify against ATO records have made a mistake in that information, or the records on the ATO systems are incorrect. And the third reason potentially is the TFM may be compromised, or there's a duplicate status on the ATO systems. And finally, the ATO data system, matching system cannot establish a unique single match, then you will get rejected as well. Again, in case you get these messages, you need to contact ATO and correct the details before you can trigger the service again. On that note, I will pass back to Sebastian, who will go through the SuperStream readiness checklist.
Thanks, Kevin. And so for those of you that were part of our July webinar, we did go through this checklist, albeit it was a user guide page. I'm just going to go through again very quickly as a recap. So this is the information you must make sure you've completed before you can use the new rollover and release authority functionality in class. So consider this not just for your existing funds, but also any new funds that you might establish in the future, particularly given that one of the first things you would want to do with a newly established fund is complete a rollover in. So you will need to make sure that all this information has been ticked off before you can proceed with the rollover request. So the first two are pretty straightforward. It's just making sure that the fund has a valid ABN and that the status is complying or regulated. The third one is making sure that the details on class match the detail on the ATO. So this is probably the one where you're most likely to need to review and update. You need to extend that to both member and trustee details, as well as bank account of the fund. As I noted in the July webinar, the bank account must be unique to the fund. So if it's not unique, the fund would have received a letter from the ATO in the last month with the action you need to take. The final point is that the fund must have a valid electronic service address. Now, point 4 says that that ESA needs to be classed as ESA, which is SMSF data flow. Now, that's if you want to use the functionality in class. You can use another ESA provider that supports SuperStream for rollover and release authority. You just won't be able to use that functionality in class. So we know that the vast majority of funds are using classes ESA. There's no additional costs to use that. There is further benefits in that it brings in employer contributions via a data feed. So we would highly encourage, if you haven't moved the fund to that new ESA previously, now is probably a good time to review that and redo that. If you want to provide this address to members so that they can advise their employer, there is a report that you'll find in class which you can run, which has this address. The address is just SMSF data flow. You will also need to advise the ATO. And probably the easiest way to do that, if you're the tax agent, is via the ATO online services. So take a look at that user guide page. It's got links on where and how to update information. But this is certainly something you'll need to make sure is up to date before you can use Rollover Release Authority using SuperStream for funds. This second table shows us all the SMSF message providers, so the ESA providers, and whether they support rollover and release authorities via SuperStream. So we can see that all of them support contributions via SuperStream, but not all of them will be supporting the rollover and release functionality. So we do know that some of the funds, for example, are using Macquarie Bank. If you continue to use that ESA provider, you would not be able to roll over in or out of the fund. In terms of release authorities, you would just need to continue with paper forms. But if you see an ESA provider with no next to it and the fund uses that ESA provider, it's probably a good idea to move them across to classes ESA. The other point to make here is the ones that say in progress. So class has been whitelisted by the ATO this week, but many of the other ESA providers are still in progress. So if you're trying to initiate a rollover in, say today, it's highly unlikely that the other fund, sorry, not highly unlikely, but it's unlikely that the other fund is going to be able to process that rollover at this point in time. However, that is going to change over the next few weeks because the 1st of October, as Kevin mentioned, is the go live date. So we would expect that by then, all the ones that are in progress would be supporting that functionality. So let's turn our attention to our second poll question of today. So I'll launch that now. So the question is on average, how long does the current process take between initiating a rollover in and receiving the payment? So that's based on the current process today. And I'll keep this open for a few moments and then we'll share the results with everyone. So I'll close that off now and share the results. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. About a third are saying it takes more than 3 weeks. About a third again saying 2 to 3 weeks. And about a third are saying 1 to 2 weeks. So as Kevin shared earlier, the hope is that going forward, most of them will fall in the first category and follow that 3-day turnaround that the APRA funds are benefiting from. So that's certainly something that is something to look forward to in relation to this new functionality. I'll hand back over to Kevin to take us through the overview of rollover transactions.
Thanks, Sebastian. So rather reinvent the wheel and actually got this straight from the ATO. It's called the Rollover Message Implementation Guide version 3. So this probably is one of the most useful diagrams that, at least for me, to understand the whole rollover and release authority process. Now, the information on the top, you got your member transferring fund, receiving fund, which I already covered. So ATO is also involved in the process. Reserve Bank, it's not part of this information here, but they are involved in relation to unclaimed super monies. The financial institutions transferring fund and financial institutions receiving fund basically is the bank account for the transferring and receiving fund. Okay. Now, the process is a bit complex in the sense that there can be potentially 3 different triggering points. What I mean by that is if you set up a new self-managed super fund, the first thing you probably will do is obviously give the ATO those details, the ABN, the tax file number, the new bank account, the member TFN, etc. So the ATO will hold these records and validate that, and then you can initiate the rollover. Now, it's very important. Sometimes that information is not just done through the annual return process, but you can report that through the tax agent online services information. The other way, which is very common, is self-managed funds winding up. One of the members no longer want to look after their own super funds, and they can roll the benefit out to an APRA funds. So they can trigger a rollover out from self-managed super fund to the APRA funds. And the third process, if the member have access to MyGov, that link to the ATO, and they can go in there, have a look at their super accounts. And if they have 3 or 4 different super accounts because of different employment arrangement they had in previously, if they want to consolidate super account, then ATO will send what we call an electronic portability form. If the self-managed super fund is the main super accounts they want to continue to hold and transfer the rest of the balance to that self-managed super fund, then the electronic policy form message will come to classify SuperStream. So as you can appreciate, there are different workflows and different triggering points for that kind of processing. Now, if there are problems, so regardless which way it goes, it's always the responsibility of the transferring funds, apart from the electronic portability form, to validate against the receiving funds details through if it's to another self-managed super fund, the self-managed super fund verification service and self-managed super fund member tick. If it's APRA funds, then the super tick and fund validation services. So this is before you can even send the request through. You have to validate that first. Then if there are errors, then the receiving fund will send a response back and saying that they cannot, the initial rollover error response will be incorrect. They can send error response. The other important thing I want to highlight is the orange area. So Class will handle all the messages and to some extent, a lot of workflow as well, but it does not support the actual payments of the money from one fund to another. That part is still the sole responsibility of the trustee of the self-managed super fund or the trustee of the APRA funds to basically approve the electronic fund transfer. They are using a payment reference number inside of the whole messaging to validate the messages. Once Class receive the payment, then we are sending a rollover transaction outcome response. Basically, it's like acknowledgement information to the receiving fund, to the transferring fund that we will have received the money. Now, I will pass back to Sebastian, who will go through the actual information in Class, how those things actually work in Class systems.
Thanks, Kevin. So let's take you through the new functionality. So we're going to start at the business level settings. We have added a new notification screen. So the reason that we've added this notification screen is that we would like to notify you when there is a message that's been received that you need to action. So either a message from another fund or a message from the ATO. So what we need you to do as soon as we've got this functionality release, which for those of you who weren't there right at the start, we're hoping to do so by the end of today. So if you jump into Class tomorrow and you go to business level settings, the first thing you should do is turn on notifications and configure it for your business. What you need to do is add a recipient. The recipient is going to be a contact person from the business contact. So if you're already a user of Class, you would automatically be in the business contact screen. If you're not a user, but you are a contact person, you can add yourself in that screen as well. So if I go ahead and start typing Kevin's name, you'll see it's a drop down. it'll come up with his name and his email address. So note, I can't edit the email address here. If I want to do that, I go back to business contacts. So this is where you can configure the notifications. You can have multiple people notified about different types of event, and you can toggle on or off which notification, which event type they would be notified for. So in terms of how you set this up, it's going to be different for each practice. Some might have 1 or 2 people notified about all events. Others might want to choose which people are going to be notified about certain events. So for example, if Kevin was to do the processing in class, I might just want him to be notified when a release authority request has been received, which needs to be actioned in class. When a rollover in is unmatched, which means that the transferring fund has made the payment, sent the message, and we just need to check that that payment's been received in class. And also when a rollover payment request has been received from a transferring fund. So if I just wanted to do the processing side, I might just want to turn these 3 notifications on. I can add that contact, and I can go back and tweak the notifications on or off. I can also remove the recipient if I no longer want them to have access. So what will happen is that when that particular notification type is received, you will receive an email. So I can show you here in my emails. You'll receive a notification. In that email, there will be a call to action or a button for you to take action. So it'll say click here. If you click on that button, it will ask you to log into class, unless of course you're already logged into class, in which case it will take you straight to that message for you to action. So certainly having that functionality turned on is going to help you respond to those messages quickly and make sure that you don't miss any. So in addition to that, we are looking to roll out this notification functionality for other parts of class in the future. So watch this space. I also want to just note that in terms of notifications, any notifications that the ATO might send to a member, so for example, that initial release authority, you wouldn't be receiving that in class. It's only messages that have been received from the ATO to the fund or from another fund that are going to come up on this notification dashboard. Now, I won't go through each of the messages, but we do have a user guide page that explains each of these message and what that would mean. So have a look at the user guide page when you get a chance. Configure your notifications. We would recommend at least having a person notified for each event, but you can have multiple people with different events each. So that's the notification dashboard, business level setting. So now let me just pause and take you through what we are releasing tomorrow and what will be in our next phase. So in our first phase of the release, you will be able to initiate rollover ins and process those. You will be able to action any digital release authority that is received from the ATO. And you will be able to action any electronic portability forms. So remember, those are the ones, they're rollover requests. They've been initiated by a member via the ATO. They've gone through the validation and then they come into class. So initiate rollover in, electronic portability form for rollovers, and digital release authority. So we will support those by the release at the end of today. What's coming very soon is the ability to initiate rollover out and to action rollover transaction requests. So rollover requests from another fund. So that's coming very soon. The other stuff is going to be there from tomorrow, or from this afternoon. So let me show you now the new dashboard that we've created to manage rollover and release authorities. So it's a business level dashboard. It's available under transactions, rollover and release authorities. It's also available as a shortcut if you're on the main screen, rollover and release authorities here. So this functionality, this dashboard, sorry, is a business level dashboard only. It's not available at the fund level. If you have fund or brand level restrictions, you will need to get someone who has the full access to action your rollovers and your release authorities, because you won't have access to this dashboard initially. So this console shows you all messages that have been received or sent. So if you initiate a rollover from here, the message would appear in this console. If you've received a message from the ATO in the form of a digital release authority, in the form of an electronic portability form, or once we've released that functionality, a request, a rollover transaction request, which is a rollover request from another fund. So they will all appear here. In terms of how you use this functionality, you've got the search. So you can search by fund name or member name. In this demo environment, I've just got the one fund, so it's not going to filter out anything. But you also have financial year. So we're starting with this current financial year, and obviously we will add subsequent financial years later. The final status is an additional filter, that will help you review, identify particular messages. So the way that the statuses are grouped is by type. So you've got the rollover in statuses, you've got the rollover out statuses, and you've got the release authority statuses. So look, the list does look quite long, potentially a little bit overwhelming, but most of the statuses that you're going to find are just going to be a common few. So I'm just going to go through what those common ones are going to be that you will encounter. Again, we have a user guide page that we will be rolling out, which will explain all of the statuses and what action you need to take if you see that status. So let's just focus on the common ones. For rollover in, once you initiate the rollover in class, you will see the request has been sent if it's successful. Once the transferring fund has received that message and actioned it and approved it, sent the payment, you will see an unmatched message. So that means that you need to wait for the payment to hit the bank account. Once that's confirmed, you can confirm that. The status will then move to complete. So they're the three most common statuses for rollover in. For rollover out, you'll start with a request received. If a request has been received from either the ATO or another fund, you will have payment not confirmed if you have approved the message and sent the payment, but you're waiting for the receiving fund to confirm receipt of that payment. And finally, complete once that is finalized and that receiving fund has confirmed receipt of payment. So again, they're the three most common for rollover out. For release authority, you've got request received. So if the ATO sends through a digital release authority, that's the status you would see. Once that has been actioned, payment has been made, and the ATO has confirmed payments, it will move to complete. So they're the most common statuses that you need to be aware of. And if you select a status, it will show you the various messages that belong under that status. So now let's turn our attention to a rollover in, how we initiate a rollover in class. So again, this button is only available on this console. It's not available at the fund level. It's just a business level functionality. So the first message you will see when you click this functionality is that not all funds may have implemented the SuperStream for rollover at this point in time. So remember back to that table that I showed you, which had many of the ESA providers were in progress. We know that a couple of APRA funds are currently live, but over the next few weeks, you will need to check with a transferring fund to make sure that they are live to receive SuperStream messages for rollovers. If they are not, you will just need to either wait until they go live or continue to use another form. So once you've confirmed with that fund, you can go and request the rollover in. So you first need to select the fund that you're rolling into. Again, if you start typing, it'll come up with a list of drop down and you'll select the appropriate fund. Once you've done that, you've got a validation for the ABN. So if you've correctly entered the ABN in the fund already, it will appear. It'll ask you to select the bank account. If you haven't entered the full bank account details, you'll need to close that, go back to the fund and update those bank account details. Same with a member. So for example, TFN. Note that with this form, if you try and if you select information that is missing, such as TFN for a lease, the system will not let you proceed. So you will need to rectify that by closing it and addressing it, or select a member that is able to accept that. So let me show you what the process is for an APRA fund. So you would need to obtain the relevant details from your member about the fund that you're the transferring fund. So the ABN, the USI, and the member ID. And then quite simply at the bottom, you just need to indicate if it's a full rollover in or partial. If it's partial, you can enter the amount. Once you click to the side or tab, you'll be able to initiate rollover. For an SMSF, similar process, slightly different information that you need to provide. So I'm going to enter this ABN. We will now need to enter the name of the SMSF and the electronic service address. Now note on here, you will only be able to select from the SA providers that support rollovers via SuperStream. Again, option for full or partial. If partial, enter the amount, and then we can initiate rollover. So once you've initiated rollover, the system will do a validation check. I'm doing this in a test environment, so it might be a little bit slower than it would ordinarily be. It should take only a couple of moments to do that validation. And then the status should change to request sent if it's successful. So whilst you wait for that, you can go back to the console and see on here, it will update once the status is correct. Now, what is actually happening here? So we've initiated the rollover in. So it's sending a message to the transferring fund, requesting the rollover with the amount and providing the bank account details. So in terms of that receiving fund, once they've received the message, you can see now it's changed to request sent. We can see the details, created, date, the amount, the receiving fund, and the transferring fund. So it's as simple as that. No need to complete a paper form anymore. This is just the only part you really need to complete now. So I'm now going to take a look at, I'll explain what happens after this. So once the transferring fund has accepted the message on their end, they will then send through a payment, organise for the payment to be made across to the receiving fund, and they will also send through a message. And once that message is received in this particular fund, they will be able to confirm or reject. If they confirm, they will need to go to class and match off the payment. Now, I can't, in this example, show you how that works because of the test example, but I will show you this next step in our following example for a rollover out. So in relation to rollover out, so just confirming that this initiate rollover out will be part of our second phase. So at the moment, if you try and request or try and initiate a rollover out in class, you will get a message that says you need to do that via the ATO. A member can log into their own MyGov. So this is a member's MyGov account, or they can send through a paper form. If you want to organise one of these rollover outs via the ATO, if you jump onto the ATO website, there are instructions on how to find that form and complete the details. But if the member completes this and the validation is successful, it will send through an electronic portability message, portability form message to class. So what does that look like? It just looks like any other message that has been created. So this is an example of a rollover out. So if we look at our rollover out, and we've got payment not confirmed. So these are examples of rollover outs that have come in via an EPF, electronic portability form. So what do you need to do to action it? Well, the first thing you need to do is confirm that the amount is the amount that the member wants to transfer out. You need to consider whether a period update needs to be completed the day before you're going to be rolling out. Now, in terms of whether or not you do that, if it's the whole amount or a substantial amount, you should be doing a period update. If you're wanting to revalue the investments to calculate the correct member balance, you should do it as well. But if it's a small amount, you can just proceed without one. So bearing in mind, if you are doing a period update, the expectation would be that you've done the processing up until the day before you run that period update as well. If you're in doubt, best to run the period update. That's the safest. So once you've done that, confirm with the trustees the amount that needs to be paid. Very importantly, as Kevin mentioned, the payment reference number, that's generated by the transferring fund once the validation is completed. This payment reference number needs to be included in the description. So when the payment is made, they should include this in the description so that that can be easily identified and matched off. So payment reference number, amount, and obviously the bank account. They're the bits of information that you would need to share with the trustee so they can make that payment. Once that payment has been made, then they will be able to confirm that in class. So in relation to that confirmation, so let me just show you the rollover out. Sorry, I'll just take you through the, sorry, I'll go to the fund and we'll look at, well, we'll look at this one actually. Sorry, this one here. So in the previous one, I'd already clicked the button before, apologies. So here, the rollover out request, once you've confirmed the payment, you can click that button. If for whatever reason you need to cancel that request, you need to select the appropriate reason. Basically, the third one is a catch-all provision. The other two are pretty self-explanatory there. So let's confirm that payment and then show you what happens in the match transaction screen. So it's a $4,000 payment on the 2nd of September. Just wait for that to update. And I'll go to my fund, match transaction screen. Okay, so you can see here, we've got the cash. Let's assume this has come through the data feed already. Here's the business event. So the business event is already created for you. We can go ahead and run auto match. If it's within 7 days, it will match that off. So just to clarify, confirming the payment on the Rollover and Release Authority dashboard does not match the event, but it does create the business event, and auto match will match off the event. So they're two separate processes from that perspective. So I'm just going to pause and go through our third poll question of the day, and then I'll come back to the section on release authorities. So what we want to know now is in relation to release authorities, what type of release authority do you process most often? Is it the Division 293 excess concessional contributions, excess non-concessional contributions, first home saver, or other? So give you a couple of moments to complete that, and we'll share the results. A few more seconds. All right, so unsurprisingly, it is Div 293, so 84%, followed by excess concessional contributions and excess non-concessional contributions. So let's take a look then at how to process a Div 293 via Digital Release Authority. So I'll stop sharing that poll. I'll go back to our business level. and back in our console. Okay, so we're going to look this time at a release authority, so request received. So let's take a look at this one here. So this is indeed a div 293. So what you should start to notice is that the functionality is very similar to confirm the payment for release authority as well as a rollover out. It's the same as well for rollover in. Slightly different informations depending on the type of fund, SMSF or APRA fund, but same sort of functionality. So again, same information is important. The payment reference number, provide that to the trustee along with the amount and the bank account, and then ensure that they use the payment reference number in the description. Again, you can reject that authority if there is a need. If it's correct, confirm the request once the payment has been made. Once again, go to the match transaction screen once that has been confirmed, and you can then match that transaction off. So let's have a look at that. So in the match transaction screen, $5,000 release authority, there's a business event. Let's use the auto match functionality to match that off. And then let's have a look at what is actually happening in the background. So let's take a look at the business events. And we're going to look at that $5,000 release authority. So what's happened, for those of you who have processed a Div 293 payment out of class previously, you would find that this form is identical. So what we're doing is we're automating this form. So this form is how you would have previously processed Div 293 manually. You can see the basic details, the payment details have been completed, including the preservation and tax components. So everything is being completed in the background just by accepting or confirming that message from the ATO. So certainly it's going to save you a lot of time. And for those of you who are familiar with or up to date with our release notes, you would have seen our last release note, we added the functionality to print lump sum reports from the report pack level. So you can now do that. You can print multiple lump sum minutes in one go. The final thing to point out is take a look at the created by column. So this shows you how a rollover has, or how rollover or a release authority has been created. If you see a person's email address, that means that they've created it manually. So the manual function will not disappear from class. You will still be able to process things manually if you need to, but for most of the cases, because you'll be using class as ESA, you'll be able to process it via the SuperStream integration. So if you're a manager or a reviewer, that's something to consider keeping in mind when you're reviewing those funds. All right, so that's the final functionality that I wanted to show you with the release authorities. So in terms of the functionality in terms of next steps, sorry. So we are planning, as I said, today we should be releasing the first part of the functionality, then we'll have phase 2. And if you have any suggestions or ideas, we'd love to hear those ideas. Please put them through the AHA portal. If you're not sure what AHA is, please reach out to us. We can send you a link to register where you can vote and submit ideas. So let me hand back to Kevin, who's now going to take you through the last section on the benchmark report.
Thanks, Sebastian. Some of you may already receive a copy of this benchmark report around 11 or 12 today. So we actually officially launched today. Just give you some background. So Class 707 benchmark report is a report compiled using de-identified data, extracted roughly about 180,000 funds. It's usually the thought leadership piece that generate a lot of interest in the industry. And this year we're actually fortunate enough to get insights from 5 key customers, including Meg from Heffron Consulting. So she did a piece on the median balance of Salmon Super Fund. Jolie Schofield from Boyce did a piece on geomapping and basically rural properties in Salmon Super Funds. And Jonathan did one on asset allocations. So there's a lot of details in the report that you can find out more. So what I'd like to share is the first couple of insights. This one is basically explaining the female participation in Salmon Super Fund compared to male participation. It's good to see that the female member balance has grown faster than male balance since 2016, and it's still remaining at 84% of male balances, but it's reaching to the point and getting equilibrium between the two members. On the right hand side, it's interesting to see that female participation for age group under 45 is 50%, but towards 85, an example, there's more male funds than female funds. So I initially thought that, in this country, female tend to outlive the males, and I will see more female funds existed. But my educated guess is that once a fund becomes a single member fund, if there's only one member left, if it's a female, they tend to one up the fund. Whereas in the male situation, they were the original drive for that Salmon Fund establishment. If they outlive their partner, they will keep the fund going. Now, the other thing is we did some analysis on the catch-up concessional contribution. FY 2020 is really the first year you actually can make up that additional contribution. So any contribution that exceeded the $25,000, we will identify as additional catch-up concessional contribution made. And it's interesting to see the average contribution for that is about 38,000 in FY 20 and increased to 45. Obviously, there's more unused portion carried to the later years. Now, the other interesting facts on the right-hand side is the age demographics for making that type of contribution is age 46 to 65, which is the age where people putting additional money away to support their retirement nest egg. We also did an opportunity to have a look at catch-up concessional contribution. The family downside contributions. And it's interesting to see that over the 3 years, the average amount for that contribution is about $250,000 thereabout. It's very interesting to see a lot of people making that contribution. They're also making a non-concessional contribution on top of that, with an amount close to $85,000 to $90,000. Now, the graph on the right-hand side, we can see that if it's a two-member fund, particularly the female members tend to make that type of contribution more often than the male members. This kind of indicate to us is that this contribution strategy is very popular, particularly to boost up the female member balance so that you can reach that equilibrium between the two members. Now, there are a lot of graphs and charts and commentary similar to what I just made in the final report. It's about 85 page report. I encourage you to have a look. If you can't get hold of this report, by all means send a request to support, and we will direct you to the link to download this report. So on that note, we are moving the floor to Q&A.
Sure. Let's just go through one or two questions. We'll just have a quick look at those questions coming in.
I've got one question. There was a question asking about whether the trustees or tax agent can access the the super tick, super member tick, and some of the super fund verification services? The answer is they can't access those services directly. They're embedded usually with the DSP or digital service provider, such as Class Super Software, which basically you are still authorized because you're the tax agent of the super fund, and you can call that service to basically validate that information. And there's another question about whether the any forms or rollover forms required. So it's not required between the funds. So if you roll the money out from the self-managed super fund to the APRA funds, there's no requirement for you to send the rollover benefit statements between the funds by paper. However, the existing functionality for rollover benefit statements still kept in class. I think in some situation you need to produce that information for your members for record keeping purposes. But certainly it's not something you need to send to the receiving fund to process the rollover.
Yeah. There's a question, where is the essay noted in a class, in a client file? It's if you run a report, you'll be able to find it for that fund. It's called SuperStream notification, ESA SuperStream notification.
Yeah, and it's also in your tax return, question 7, section A of your supplementary annual return.
So here's the actual report.
Yeah.
All right, look, given it's just past 3 o'clock, we might end it there. There has been a lot of questions asked. We will share a copy of the Q&A next week, along with the recording and the presentation. We hope you found this insightful, and if you wouldn't mind giving us a couple of moments of your time completing the survey, that'd be much appreciated. Keep an eye out to later today and tomorrow for the new functionality, and we look forward to speaking to you next month.
Thanks, everyone.